Hello there, welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
I'm Licciardello, and once again, we've got a situation.
Vladimir Putin has come and gone from Alaska.
We got along great. You know, he's a strong guy.
When is this war going to end?
There's no deal until there's a deal.
This is exactly what President Zelensky and European leaders feared the most.
No ceasefire, no sanctions. Has Putin just given Trump a lesson in the art of no deal? We'll ask former US Ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor, about that.
Why Americans might miss some of those illegal immigrants when they're gone. But first...
With the air of a reality show, President Trump met with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin for the first time in his second term on the weekend to talk about an end to the Russian war in Ukraine. Adding to the anticipation and drama on the way to Alaska, Trump told reporters on board Air Force One what he wanted to achieve.
I want to see a ceasefire rapidly. I don't know if it's going to be today, but I'm not going to be happy if it's not today. Everyone said it can't be today, but I'm just saying I want the killing to stop. I'm in this to stop the killing.
Amid incredibly tight security, the red carpet was rolled out on the tarmac at the US military base in Anchorage. Trump clapped as Putin approached. The presidents shook hands, chatted warmly about being neighbours. There was a slightly less warm US Air Force flyover, including a B-2 stealth bomber, the type that recently targeted Iran's nuclear program. But adding to the stage-managed feel, there was an awards ceremony-style podium with more military hardware on show. And President Trump even gave Putin a free ride in his presidential limousine, much to Putin's apparent satisfaction. He had the pictures he wanted after more than 3 years of war and being treated as a pariah by Western leaders, including Joe Biden, who refused to even speak to him on the phone. Then the two men disappeared from view for an expected series of meetings, some due to include foreign and trade ministers, and as the hours ticked by, the world held its breath. Would Trump offer up land that Ukraine is not prepared to cede to their invader? Would there be another bust-up? Would Trump sell Alaska back to Russia? Then, ahead of schedule, the leaders appeared at a joint press conference. Putin, given the chance to speak first, standing at a lectern behind the seal of the American president. He talked about Russia and America and their shared history of fighting common enemies in World War II and their common political enemies too.
Today, when President Trump saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that.
So Joe Biden forced Putin to invade Ukraine. Still, no mention of a ceasefire, just a restatement of Russia's many grievances. Trump then said that progress had been made, but he didn't say what. He was vague, to say the least.
There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite got there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal.
And there was no deal. Trump was unusually taciturn, speaking for barely 3 minutes. And while everyone scratched their heads, Putin sprung a surprise, inviting Trump to meet him again in Moscow.
We'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all.
There were plenty of questions, but the men left the stage without answering any of them. Before getting back onto Air Force One, Trump did speak to his longtime booster Sean Hannity on Fox News, and bizarrely, not only did Trump seem more concerned about the Russian soldiers dying in Ukraine than the Ukrainians dying, but he even parroted Kremlin propaganda that Ukrainian civilian deaths are the inadvertent result of Russia targeting missile manufacturers.
I want to see people stop dying in Ukraine, and that's what's happening. We're losing 5, 6, 7,000. They're Russians, mostly Russians, and they're Ukrainian soldiers. There's some people dying in cities and towns where they're trying to blow up missile manufacturers and other things in some cities. I don't know if you know what's going on there, but there are a lot of people dying.
It's not exactly what's going on there. Last month, the United Nations reported at least 13,580 Ukrainian civilians, including 716 children, have been killed by Russia since February 2022. Human Rights Watch says that Russian forces fail to distinguish between civilian and military objectives. or to avoid disproportionate civilian casualties, and that constituted war crimes under international law. Still, this meeting wasn't a total wash, Chaz, because Trump did get some of the flattery he craves, and Putin sure knows how to deliver.
Vladimir said just a little while ago, he said, I've never seen anybody do so much so fast. He said, your country is like hot as a pistol. And a year ago, he thought it was dead.
No wonder Trump likes him. Look, I'm not surprised there was no breakthrough. Trump started shifting the goalposts before he was even in Alaska. He tried to make this all about a potential second meeting instead.
We have a meeting with President Putin tomorrow. I think it's going to be a good meeting, but the more important meeting will be the second meeting that we're having. We're going to have a meeting with President Putin, President Zelensky, myself, and maybe we'll bring some of the European leaders along, maybe not.
Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth shifted those goalposts even further to the point that he was proclaiming the real victory was getting Putin to agree to a one-on-one meeting in the first place, even though that's something Putin's been seeking for a very long time.
Nobody else could have created the conditions that lead to a meeting like this.
Hasn't been there since 2015, Putin in the United States.
Nope. And certainly under Joe Biden, the violence raged, the war raged, and Putin never took him serious enough to even consider a meeting. So already President Trump has changed the game.
Congrats, I guess. Look, it's not like Putin gave Trump absolutely nothing. He did give this concession that Ukraine was going to exist in the future and it would require actual security.
And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we're prepared to work on that.
Look, that's not a lot, but it's more than I think Putin has conceded before, to be fair. On the other hand, after the meeting, Trump started tweeting things like, it was determined by all that the best way to end the horrific war between Russia and Ukraine is to go directly to a peace agreement which would end the war, and not a mere ceasefire agreement, which oftentimes do not hold up. And the reason that that's noteworthy is because it was not decided by all. Europe apparently has quite a problem with that theory, because skipping ceasefire talks and going straight for a peace deal has been a long-term demand of Putin's. You see, a ceasefire would give Ukraine relief from Moscow's attacks, and it would deprive Putin of some leverage at the bargaining table. And until this meeting, Trump had agreed that no peace negotiations should begin without a ceasefire. So, might be a one step forward, two steps back situation here. And finally, we should remind ourselves where the original goalposts for Trump and Russia were 19 days ago. I believe there was a deadline for a ceasefire somewhere.
10 days from today.
Got it.
Okay?
Got it.
Good. How do you communicate? We have a scoop. And then, we're going to put on tariffs and stuff, and I don't know if it's going to affect Russia, because he wants to obviously probably keep the war going. But we're going to put on tariffs and the various things that you put on.
So, 9 days after the 10 days was up, we have no ceasefire, no more deadline, no concessions from Putin, and somehow no more sanctions. So I'm not sure what's going on there, John.
Yeah, I wonder what the Russian word for taco is, Chaz. For more on all of that, we're joined by William Taylor. He served as US Ambassador to Ukraine under Presidents Bush and Obama, and chargé d'affaires to Ukraine under President Trump. Mr. Ambassador, welcome to Planet America. So what did you make of this Alaska meeting? No ceasefire, no sanctions. Does this equal a diplomatic failure for the United States?
There was good news and bad news coming out of that summit on Friday. The good news was there was no Yalta and there was no Munich. Of course, by Yalta, I mean the big powers didn't get together and divide up small powers like Churchill and Roosevelt and Stalin did at Yalta in World War II. That didn't happen, at least that we know of. And on Munich, so President Trump did not, that we know of, throw Ukraine under the bus like Neville Chamberlain did Czechoslovakia. So the good news, no Yalta and no Munich. The bad news is what you referred to, and that is there was no ceasefire. And this was a disappointment because all of the preparations, including a lot of conversations with President Zelensky and these same European leaders who are en route here to Washington, and the conversations last Wednesday, before the Friday summit, all agreed that the ceasefire would be the first priority and that President Trump would go into the meeting with President Putin and demand a ceasefire. And if President Putin said no, then, as you say, sanctions would follow. Well, that didn't happen. Didn't get ceasefires, and the sanctions were diverted.
Now, Ambassador, there has been some suggestion that Trump talking about potential peace deals instead of a ceasefire does reflect Putin's preferences. Is peace versus ceasefire that big an issue? And if so, why is it?
It is a big issue. The Ukrainians really want the firing and the killing to stop. And that's what President Trump has been talking about as well. Stop the killing. The Russians want it to continue. The Russians want to continue to grind forward, take a little bit more territory here, a little bit more territory there, stall. Don't let there be an agreement or a ceasefire, drag out negotiations so that they can drag out the fight. That's what the Russians have been doing, and that's what they will continue to do. So there's a big difference between going for a ceasefire now, first priority, which again was the agreement among the Ukrainians, Europeans, and Americans last Wednesday. A big distinction between that ceasefire and ceasefire later at the end of the negotiations. The negotiations are going to go months, probably years. And during that time, we should not accept the killing that would continue under the Russian scheme. So I hope that the rumors, the reports, unconfirmed reports that President Trump listened with some interest to Putin's suggestion along those lines. I hope that is not the case. And I hope this discussion tomorrow with the Europeans and President Zelensky will disabuse President Trump of any idea along those lines, and they'll go back to the agreed priority of a ceasefire.
I wonder, Ambassador, whether you think that a NATO-style Article 5 mutual defence guarantee would be enough to deter Russia from a future invasion, given that Donald Trump has already cast doubt on whether he would honour Article 5 and defend NATO members in any event.
President Trump doesn't have to stick to any bad ideas, or any ideas for that matter. And he is now, since the NATO summit in the spring, where he went and came back impressed, saying good things about NATO, including Article 5, including about the members of NATO, European members of NATO, who had stepped up with 5% of GDP for defense and defense. That was a big deal for President Trump. He felt very good about it. And so I think he is now, at least for now, committed to NATO. And then your question about Article 5-like agreement, that's what the Italian Prime Minister, she's been very clear about that idea. And the coalition of the willing that the French and the Brits are putting together, that may include troops on the ground, British, French, maybe German, Polish troops on the ground to enforce a ceasefire to deter another Russian invasion. That could well happen. And if President Trump is saying good things about security guarantee, then that's a step forward.
Now, the criticism for Trump has been about him giving away the prestige of international recognition for not much in return. Does that prestige really matter, or is it legit for Trump to just not care about that kind of thing?
It's a good question. The fact is that Putin did get one of the two things. He got both of the things he wanted out of that summit. He got a chance to be standing side by side with the President of the United States, photos taken, messages to Russians, but also to others. Other heads of state are going to say, well, if the American president can be talking to Putin, why shouldn't we? So I think this is a bad precedent. There was a good reason that President Putin was excluded from discussions, from polite society. He's been out in the cold. He now thinks he's back in from the cold, thanks to President Trump. And I think that's unfortunate.
In Alaska, Ambassador, we saw President Putin invite Donald Trump to Moscow for their next meeting. I wonder, would you be advising in favour of that? I don't imagine that President Zelensky would be too happy to be going to Moscow.
Not at all. What a bad idea. Now, President Trump will not go, I am sure. You're right about the Ukrainians' view of all of that red carpets and clapping and handshaking and all that. The Ukrainians were appalled. There were a lot of Europeans were appalled. There were probably a lot of Australians that were appalled at that kind of this. I mean, President Putin is responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths in Ukraine. He's responsible for at least 19,000, some say 30,000 children, Ukrainian children being kidnapped and taken back into Russia. He is reviled in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians were voted by the pump. They recognize you're going to have to talk to this guy, and they recognize their president is going to have to talk to this guy. But it's only to end this war. Find a way to end this war. You're probably going to have to talk to this guy, but this guy is a pariah.
Ambassador Bill Taylor, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Planet America.
Glad to do it.
Now, the Trump administration's crackdown on immigrants is well documented, with ICE agents rounding up thousands every week as part of Trump's promised mass deportations. But amongst those getting arrested are farm workers, and without them, grocery prices could soar, as Melina Wicks explains in the briefing room.
Trump won the last election off the back of two major promises.
But I won on the border, and I won on groceries. It's a very simple word, groceries. Like almost, who uses the word? I started using the word, the groceries.
I think Trump thinks he invented the word groceries. The problem with promising mass deportation and lower grocery prices is you really can't do both. According to a National Agricultural Workers Survey, 47% of employees in that sector are unauthorized. And it's not just agriculture. Undocumented immigrants make up an estimated 5.2% of the total American workforce. They're working all over America, even in, say, a certain president's golf clubs.
This man, whom we've decided not to name, has worked in restaurants for 20 years since slipping across the desert from Mexico. In 2008, he moved up to Trump National Westchester Golf Club. But in his decade at the club, this worker had risen to banquet chef and earning as much as $70,000 a year.
I am shocked to hear that Donald Trump paid his workers. The American economy has always benefited off the back of undocumented immigrants. In fact, it wasn't even illegal to hire them until 1986. And even now, it's a law that's barely enforced, with fewer than a dozen employers prosecuted in a single year. The use of so-called illegal immigrants is so tacitly accepted, they even pay taxes. How do they pay taxes? Because in 1996, the IRS created the Individual Taxpayer Identification Number. So you can still pay the government, even if you're a non-resident alien. No wonder E.T. went home. He didn't want to give the IRS their 10%. People in favor of mass deportations argue illegal immigration leads to lower wages and fewer jobs for American workers. Or to put it another way,
they're taking your jobs. They're taking your jobs.
But the inconvenient truth is that it's not just employers that benefit from underpaying undocumented workers. American consumers benefit too.
More than half the workers in the dairy industry are undocumented.
If I hired Americans to do the work, I would have to pay probably about $100,000 a year per person. I would be out of business within 6 months. I couldn't afford it. If the price of milk was, or like a gallon of milk cost $10 in the store, then I could probably do that.
That's about $2.65 a litre in Australian terms. And yeah, sometimes we pay that. So if Americans really want a workforce that's entirely legal, they can have it. But they're going to have to pay for it every time they buy their
groceries. It's a very simple word, groceries.
Yes, grocery prices are an important thing. They might have won Trump the last election, and that's why he would have been concerned about the latest Producer Price Index. That's the measure of prices paid to domestic producers for their output. It climbed by 0.9% in July, as in 0.9% more just for 1 month. and 3.3% for the year. Now that's ominous. The same thing happened in early 2021 before inflation went through the roof in 2022. Also, if we look at the most affected products, wholesale prices for food rose by 1.4% for the month. Wholesale prices for consumer electronics went up by 3% for the month, and those are exactly the products you'd expect tariffs to hit. Producers even paid 39% more for fresh and dry vegetables. 39%! That's the largest monthly increase ever recorded in a summer month. And you can't tell me that isn't going to get passed on to consumers. Now, I know Trump probably won't notice if veggie prices go up, but what this means, though, is that Trump is going to be super nervous about the next inflation figures, which will reveal what consumers are paying. And that makes it highly convenient that Trump just sacked the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics for not producing positive enough figures. And who he replaced her with is this guy on the right.
Have we put in our own person into BLS? Is a MAGA Republican that President Trump knows and trusts, are they running the Bureau of Labor Statistics yet, sir?
No, unfortunately, Steve, we still haven't gotten there.
Yes, that is potentially the next head of statistics there, E.J. Antony, saying that Trump should appoint someone who's in the tank for him. But economists are less sure. The chief economist at the International Center for Law and Economics says there's just nothing in his writing or his resume to suggest that he's qualified for the position, besides that he's always manipulating the data to favour Trump in some way. Manhattan Institute economist Jessica Riedel says senators who vote to confirm Antony are voting to essentially eviscerate the BLS and its jobs data. Now, those are both conservatives, by the way, I just quoted. This supposedly neutral statistician even showed up at January 6, although admittedly he was only on the periphery and he says he was just in the area for meetings. Sure. So what happens if this guy is in charge of government stats when the next awful inflation figure comes in? Especially when he knows that his president is so innumerate that he says things like this.
We've cut drug prices by 1,200, 1,300, 1,400, 1,500%. I don't mean 50%, I mean 14, 1,500%.
A lot of economics types are getting nervous, John.
Yeah, they're not the only ones, Chaz. A week into the federal takeover of Washington, D.C.'s policing, and the White House PR team is pumping out lots of dramatic videos like this one. And who is that desperado being taken away in cuffs after a SWAT team busted down his door? Was he the one that doctored the Epstein files, or maybe he attacked police on January the 6th? No. He's a Justice Department employee named Sean Dunn, a.k.a. the Sandwich Guy.
Oh! 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 It's fucking done!
I hope that shocking footage didn't alarm you at home. We should have given a content warning, John.
It was blood-chilling stuff,
Because, you know, that guy there is actually going to get punished more severely than anyone on January 6 did who beat police officers with poles. They actually charged him with the same offence as many January 6s, and I don't think Trump's going to be pardoning him.
No, I think you're probably right there. But this crackdown, of course, is very serious. Here is how Attorney General Pam Bondi sees it.
Under Donald Trump's directive, D.C. will become safe again, and it will become clean again.
And by clean again, she's talking about this kind of thing.
Under the direction of the federal government, D.C. police led the clearing of homeless encampments Friday.
They were shocking and they were lightning fast, and we were not expecting it to go the way that it was.
Which may make some D.C. residents and indeed the president feel better, but it's very bad news for the estimated 5,000 homeless people in the District of Columbia. They're being relocated out of D.C. with their belongings now thrown into dumpsters along with their only shelter.
OK, so life's changing for the homeless, but what about the criminals? That's what this is meant to be about. After 6 days of the crackdown, the administration was boasting about having made 100 arrests in total, compared to the 68 arrests that DC police make on average every single day. Trump has been defending his moves, though, by attacking Washington, D.C. generally, saying that the real crime numbers in D.C. are many times worse than they seem, because he says the Democratic government of D.C. has largely stopped investigating, arresting and prosecuting most crime. And that's a theme that many Republicans have been hitting upon.
The leaders in the Washington, D.C., especially and I will say this, the very racist mayor, and people may get eyebrows when I raise that, but he's the one that brings in race into the conversation. So he's the one that's pointing the fingers at it, and when you point one finger, you got three pointing back at you. But for him to say that and flat out lie to the American people, he knows exactly what's happening. Crime is not down. The lack of prosecution is down. Violations don't even exist in Washington, D.C. Traffic laws don't hardly exist in Washington, D.C.
Okay, there's a lot there, and it's interesting for a few reasons, John. Firstly, the mayor of D.C. is a woman and hasn't even mentioned race, so Senator Mullen clearly has no idea who she is. And two, if Senator Mullen wants to see the D.C. police crack down on traffic offences, I know who they can start with.
And by the way, I'm not joking when I say this. I drive around in Washington, D.C. in my Jeep, and yes, I do drive myself, and I don't buckle up. And the reason why I don't buckle up, and people can say whatever they want to, they can raise their eyebrows at me again, is because of carjacking.
Get the right squad under him!
Surely that just makes it easier to rip him out of the car.
I don't know. All I know is... Anyway, more importantly, if federal politicians are worried about the DC justice system, they can blame themselves. The federal government controls much of the city's criminal justice system, from its prosecutor to its court, to its parole and pretrial release systems, to its judges, leading to a huge number of judicial vacancies and long waits for cases to be heard. This despite DC residents paying more federal tax per capita than any state and more federal taxes overall than 19 states. They still get treated like second-class citizens and without proper voting representation in Congress. We saw yet another example of this lack of respect a few days ago when Attorney General Pam Bondi installed the director of the Drug Enforcement Administration to be the acting head of the DC Police Department. And while I can understand why the administration might think that the DC police chief wouldn't be super interested in chain of command issues...
Can you tell us what the chain of command is now?
What does that mean?
Well, is it Pam Bondi speaking to the mayor, speaking to you, or how does this work?
I don't think administration is her strong point. But the law is pretty clear that the Trump admin can't literally just replace the police chief. As Mayor Bowser wrote, the law requires the mayor to provide the services of the DC police for federal purposes at the request of the president, and that is all. The administration kind of acknowledged this as well by backing down the next day, and that is good to see, because Republicans are increasingly sliding down slippery slopes at the moment.
We're going to support this. We're going to support doing this in other cities if it works out in Washington, D.C. And again, it's unfortunate, but we spend a lot on our military. Our military has been in many countries around the world for the past 2 decades, walking the streets, trying to reduce crime in other countries. We need to focus on the big cities in America now, and that's what the president's doing.
He's getting a bit carried away there, I think, bringing Iraq to New York, although maybe all this heated rhetoric is providing the opportunity for a bit of a banger.
Yeah.
Crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor. Murder reached the highest rate probably ever. Violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, car thefts, doubled, carjackings more than tripled, mugged and raped and shot and killed, wild youth, drugged out maniacs and homeless people, caravans of mass youth rampage through city streets. They love to spit in the face of the police. You know, I'm going to see Putin on Friday. It's embarrassing talking about how unsafe and how disgusting trash and the graffiti and the grime and the dirt in Washington today. The worst places on earth. Homegrown criminals, juvenile offenders, men playing in women's sport, everybody transgender, bad people, rough people. It's a disgrace. I flew over it the other day and I said, what a beautiful place called Washington, D.C. If our capital's dirty, our whole country is dirty. Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
It's a horror show.
Yeah. These streets will make you
complete and total lawlessness. I think we need a ballroom.
Okay.
Let's hear it.
D.C., D.C., D.C.
Yeah.
D.C., D.C.
Exactly.
as far as cover versions go, that's not too bad. That's it for another trip to Planet America. We will be back at the same time next week, 9:35 Monday night, ABC TV.
And do not forget the Weekend Edition on ABC News Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern, and both shows are on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook. See you then.
Bye-bye.